She hadn't done anything wrong. 80-year-old Evelyn Carter, frail but proud, was simply trying to cross the street that Sunday afternoon in Atlanta, Georgia. Her cane tapped against the uneven sidewalk, her grocery bag swayed in her trembling hand, and the late summer heat pressed down on her like a weight. People were moving about, parents with strollers, teenagers laughing, churchgoers heading home. It was just another ordinary day, until the patrol car screeched to a halt in front of her. "Ma'am, stop right there!" The voice cut across the street like a whip. Officer Daniel Mercer, broad-shouldered, mid-40s, stepped out of the car. His hand rested on his holster, his jaw tight. Evelyn froze. Heads turned. Conversation stopped. What followed in the next 5 minutes would haunt every single witness. The officer accused her of blocking traffic. He mocked her for walking too slowly. And then, in front of a growing crowd, he snatched her grocery bag, spilling apples and bread into the gutter. Evelyn bent to pick them up, but Mercer shoved her shoulder, nearly knocking her down. Gasps filled the air. A young mother covered her child's eyes. Someone whispered, "Why is he doing this?" Another man muttered, "It's just an old woman." But nobody moved, nobody dared, and Evelyn, she didn't cry, didn't beg. She just stood there, her back trembling but unbroken, staring up at the man towering over her. In that silence, in that fragile dignity, something unspeakable was set in motion. Because what Officer Mercer didn't know, what not a single soul in that crowd realized, was that this moment would ignite a chain of events no one could stop. And by the time it was over, reputations, families, even entire careers would lie in ruin. So before we continue, I want to ask you this. What would you have done if you were standing there? Would you have stepped in to defend her? Or would fear have held you back? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts. And if stories like this grip you, make sure you subscribe, because what comes next will leave you stunned. Now, let's go back to that street corner, to that exact moment where one man's decision turned an ordinary Sunday into the beginning of a storm. Evelyn's cane clattered against the pavement as she tried to steady herself. The officer's shove had been small, but for someone her age, even the smallest force carried danger. Her thin fingers clenched the handle, her knuckles white with strain. She whispered something under her breath. No one could quite hear it, but those close enough swore. Later she said, "Not today, not again." The crowd shifted uneasily. A teenager pulled out his phone, angling it discreetly to record, but Mercer caught the movement. "You put that away," he barked, pointing straight at the boy. "This is police business." The boy froze, his thumb trembling over the record button. The crowd's silence thickened. Mothers clutched their children closer. Men looked down at their shoes, as if avoiding Mercer's eyes would keep them safe. The air itself seemed to tighten. Evelyn's groceries lay scattered in the street. One apple rolled slowly downhill, bumping against a parked car tire. She bent again to retrieve them, her knees stiff, her breath uneven. But before she could gather a single item, Mercer's boot came down, hard, crushing the loaf of bread beneath it. "Pathetic," he muttered, and that word, it cut deeper than the shove. A young woman in the crowd gasped, her voice breaking. "She's somebody's grandmother," she cried. Heads turned toward her, but Mercer's glare snapped her back into silence. He was the one in charge here. He always was. But then Evelyn did something that caught everyone off guard. She straightened up, shoulders back, chin lifted just enough to meet his stare. No shaking, no tears, just a quiet strength that unsettled him. "Son," she said, her voice soft but steady, "you don't scare me." It wasn't loud, it wasn't defiant, but in that stillness, it was the most dangerous thing she could have said. The words seemed to echo, carried not by volume, but by the sheer audacity of an elderly woman refusing to bow. The crowd felt it. Every person standing there knew. This was no longer just about groceries. Something bigger was unfolding. Mercer's jaw clenched tighter. For a brief second, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. Then just as quickly, it hardened into rage. He stepped closer. "Do you want to be arrested, ma'am? Because that's where this is headed." The crowd shifted again. Arrest? For walking too slowly across the street? For daring to speak back? Whispers rippled, growing louder, bolder. Someone muttered, "This ain't right." Another said, "He can't do that." Mercer heard them, and that was when he made his second mistake. "Anyone else got a problem with how I do my job?" he roared, sweeping his eyes across the onlookers. Silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Fear sat heavy on their shoulders, except, from the back of the crowd, a deep voice cut through, calm, controlled, almost surgical in its delivery. "Yes," it said, "I do." Every head turned, and in that instant, everything began to shift. The crowd parted slowly, uneasily, like water forced around a stone. Eyes shifted, shoulders leaned aside, and from that gap, a man stepped forward. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't raising his hands or shouting. He simply walked, steady, deliberate, each step making Mercer's grip on control slip just a little more. The officer's brow furrowed. His jaw worked, chewing on the sudden challenge. "Sir, this doesn't concern you," Mercer growled, his hand brushing the holster at his side. "Keep moving." But the man didn't move, not away, not back. He stopped just a few feet from Evelyn, close enough to show he was on her side, but careful not to touch her. His presence alone was enough to shift the balance. And here's the thing. He didn't even look at Mercer. Not at first. His eyes went straight to Evelyn's groceries on the ground, the crushed loaf under Mercer's boot, the bruised apple by the curb. Then, slowly, he bent down and picked up the carton of milk, brushing off the dust as though restoring dignity to the moment. Only then did he lift his gaze to the officer. "Is this what you call protecting and serving?" he asked, his tone razor-sharp in its calm. The crowd stirred. A few gasps, a few muffled "Yas." They could feel it. This wasn't a bystander with shaky courage. This was someone who spoke with authority, someone Mercer wasn't prepared to dismiss so easily. But Mercer couldn't back down. Not here. Not with phones recording, not with whispers building. His hand stayed near his belt, fingers tapping, the unspoken threat clear. Evelyn's voice broke the silence. "Don't," she whispered, just loud enough for the man to hear. "Don't let him drag you down with me." Her words carried the weight of history. Decades of knowing when to speak, when to stay quiet, when to survive. But this moment wasn't going to disappear like so many others. The crowd was watching. The recording light on one phone blinked red. And yet Mercer still leaned forward, his shadow falling across both Evelyn and the stranger. "You're obstructing an investigation," he said. The man tilted his head. "An investigation into what? A bag of groceries?" The crowd chuckled, low at first, then stronger, until Mercer snapped his head toward them, silencing the laughter with a glare. His power was slipping, but he refused to admit it. That's when the sound came. A siren, distant, faint, but growing closer. Another cruiser approaching. Back up. The crowd froze, unsure whether to feel relief or fear. For some, it meant safety. For others, it meant more trouble. Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment, her lips moving in what looked like a silent prayer. Her cane wobbled in her grip, but she held firm. The man beside her didn't flinch. He didn't even glance toward the sirens. He just kept his gaze locked on Mercer, as though he knew something the officer didn't. The crowd waited, phones ready, hearts pounding. And here's the part nobody could explain later. Evelyn's words from minutes before, those quiet, steady words, seemed to hang in the air like a prophecy. Not today. Not again. But what did she mean? And who exactly was the man standing at her side? The answers would not come yet. The wail of the siren cut through the air like a blade, closer now, echoing off brick walls and glass storefronts. Heads turned instinctively toward the corner where the flashing lights grew brighter, nearer. The crowd's whispers rose again. Some faces lit with hope, others darkened with dread. Everyone knew more officers could either bring order or escalate chaos. Mercer smirked, the corner of his mouth twitching upward as the cruiser slowed to a stop. He adjusted his belt, straightening his stance as though ready to prove a point. "This," he announced loudly for all to hear, "is how you restore control." Doors slammed. 2 officers stepped out, younger than Mercer, but wearing the same uniform, the same badge, the same authority stitched across their chests. The first one, Officer Reynolds, moved briskly, eyes scanning the crowd. The second, Officer Kent, stopped short, his gaze falling immediately on Evelyn, then on the stranger standing at her side. Reynolds barked, "Disperse! Everyone move along!" But nobody moved. Not this time. Not after what they'd seen. Cameras stayed raised, breaths held. The crowd wasn't just watching anymore. They were witnessing. Mercer pointed toward Evelyn. "This woman is resisting. She's obstructing traffic. She's creating a disturbance." A ripple of disbelief spread through the crowd. A mother whispered, "She can barely stand, and he's calling her a criminal?" Reynolds hesitated. He glanced at Kent, who still hadn't moved. Something in Kent's stare, fixed on Evelyn, steady, searching, made Reynolds pause. "Sir," Reynolds asked carefully, "what exactly happened here?" Mercer's voice sharpened. "What happened is I gave her a lawful order, and she defied it. And now this man," he jabbed a finger toward the stranger, "is interfering with police business." The man finally spoke again, his voice low, precise. "If defending an elderly woman from humiliation counts as interference," he said, "then I suppose I'm guilty." Gasps broke out. Phones lifted higher. The crowd was leaning in now, pulled tight into the drama. Evelyn touched his arm gently. "Please," she whispered again. But her eyes told a different story. Pride, gratitude, something unspoken she wasn't ready to reveal. Reynolds shifted uneasily. His training told him one thing. His conscience whispered another. He looked at Mercer, then at Evelyn, then at the stranger. Kent finally stepped forward. He said nothing at first. Just walked toward Evelyn, his boots crunching softly on the pavement. He bent down, not to cuff her, not to push her aside, but to pick up the apple by the curb. He brushed it off with his sleeve, placed it back in her torn grocery bag, and looked Mercer dead in the eye. "Is this the disturbance you're talking about?" The crowd erupted, cheers, claps, voices rising. For the first time, Mercer looked rattled. He hissed under his breath, "Watch yourself, Kent." But Kent didn't blink. He simply said, "We all are." The sirens in the distance faded as the cruiser lights blinked steadily on. Evelyn stood taller now, clutching her cane with both hands, her face lit with quiet defiance. And as the noise of the crowd swelled, Mercer realized something he hadn't planned for. His control was slipping, piece by piece, word by word. But here's what no one understood yet. This was only the beginning. If you were standing in that crowd, watching an elderly woman humiliated like this, what would you have done? Comment below. I need to know. And subscribe now because this story doesn't end here. The real shock hasn't even begun. Mercer's face flushed red, the kind of anger that doesn't come from authority. It comes from fear. Fear of losing control, fear of being exposed. He took a step forward, his boots striking the pavement hard, his hand twitching near his taser. "You all think this is funny?" he barked, his voice cracking with the weight of rage. "You think you can stand here, mock an officer of the law, and walk away?" The crowd quieted, but it wasn't fear this time. It was focus. Every camera was locked on him now, every eye watching. He wasn't just fighting Evelyn anymore. He was fighting his own reflection in dozens of lenses. Evelyn's cane tapped once against the ground. Tap, tap, almost like a drumbeat in the silence. She lifted her chin and spoke again, her voice trembling but steady. "I've seen your kind before. You hide behind a badge, but you can't hide from the truth." The words cut through him, sharper than any blade. Mercer's jaw worked, his fists clenched, his chest rising and falling too fast. He wanted to strike, to silence her, to reassert dominance. Yet he knew that one wrong move now could ruin him forever. "Truth?" he spat, sneering. "The truth is I give the orders here, and you—" He jabbed his finger at Evelyn. "You don't walk away until I say so." For a split second, the crowd thought he might lunge. The tension tightened like a rope about to snap. Phones shook in nervous hands. Mothers shielded children's eyes. Then, out of nowhere, the stranger beside Evelyn stepped closer. Not rushing, not threatening. Just enough to put himself squarely between her and Mercer. His shadow overlapped hers. "You've already lost," he said quietly, but loud enough for Mercer and everyone else to hear. The crowd erupted again. Cheers, shouts, the wave of energy Mercer couldn't contain. His authority was dissolving in real time. Reynolds whispered urgently, "Mercer, let it go. Too many witnesses." But Mercer didn't move. His lips curled into something between a snarl and a smile, the kind of look that told everyone this wasn't finished. Then, almost on cue, a voice crackled through the police radio on his shoulder. Static, then a call from dispatch. The words weren't clear, but whatever was said made Mercer stiffen. He grabbed the mic, turned his back to the crowd, and hissed into it, his voice low, tense, his shoulders rigid, and when he turned back, his eyes locked on Evelyn with something colder than rage, something calculated. He leaned in, his voice low enough only she and the stranger could hear. "This isn't over," he said. "You'll regret today." Evelyn's hand tightened on her cane, her lips pressed together. She didn't flinch. The stranger just stared back at him, silent, like he already knew Mercer had just made the biggest mistake of his life. And as Mercer stormed toward his cruiser, the crowd roaring behind him, Evelyn whispered again, soft, steady, like a warning carried on the wind. "Not today, not again." But this time, the words weren't just for Mercer. They were for all of them. The crowd felt it. And deep down, so did Mercer. Because while everyone thought the confrontation ended there on that street, the truth was, the story was only beginning. Mercer yanked open the cruiser door, his hand trembling on the handle. The roar of the crowd followed him, but he didn't look back. His jaw was locked, his neck stiff, every muscle in his body screaming for retaliation he couldn't afford. For a moment, it seemed like he might drive off, end it, leave his humiliation behind. But instead, he reached for the radio again. Static filled the air, sharp and jagged, before his voice cut through. "Dispatch, run me a check. Evelyn Johnson, age, approximately 70. The crowd fell silent. Evelyn's head turned slowly. The color drained from her face. She hadn't given him her name. Nobody had. So how did he know it? The stranger stiffened. His gaze flicked toward Mercer, then toward Evelyn. Something unspoken passed between them, a warning, a memory, a history. Mercer smirked, his voice carrying now, deliberately loud. "Let's see what your record shows, huh? People like you always got something to hide." Phones tilted higher, capturing every second. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone shouted, "She didn't do anything!" Another yelled, "Leave her alone!" But Mercer wasn't talking to them anymore. He was talking to Evelyn, staring at her, drilling into her with eyes that promised this was far from finished. Evelyn's grip tightened on her cane until her knuckles turned white. Her lips moved, but this time no words came out. Whatever memory Mercer's words had pulled from her past, it was locked inside, too heavy to speak aloud. The stranger shifted, stepping even closer to her side, his shoulders squared, his jaw set. "That's enough," he said. Mercer leaned against the cruiser door, casual now, like he had all the time in the world. "You think this is over?" This is just chapter 1, lady. Believe me, next time it won't be a bag of groceries." His words hung heavy in the air, ominous, promising something more. The sirens in the distance faded completely. The crowd's voices swelled again, angry, defiant. But Evelyn didn't speak. She didn't move. She just stared at Mercer with eyes that told him one thing. She had survived worse. And as he slammed the cruiser door shut, tires screeching as he pulled away, the stranger turned to her and asked quietly, so only she could hear, "What did he mean by that?" Evelyn's reply was faint, almost lost under the noise of the dispersing crowd. "He knows things he shouldn't know." The stranger's eyes narrowed. "About you?" Her answer came like a whisper carried on the wind. "About all of us." The cameras stopped rolling. The crowd began to scatter. But the story was only tightening its grip. Because Evelyn Johnson carried a secret. One Mercer had just threatened to expose, and that secret would change everything. The crowd melted away in waves, murmurs fading, camera lights dimming, footsteps echoing down side streets. One by one they disappeared, until only Evelyn and the stranger remained beneath the fading glow of the cruiser's red and blue reflections. Her cane tapped softly against the pavement as she turned, gathering what was left of her groceries. The bag sagged in her hand, bruised apples rolling loosely inside. She moved slowly, not from weakness this time, but from the weight of something unsaid. The stranger bent down, retrieving the loaf of bread Mercer had crushed beneath his boot. He brushed it off, held it for a second longer than necessary, then tucked it gently into her bag. "Let me walk you home," he said. Evelyn hesitated, her eyes narrowing as though studying him, measuring him. For a moment she looked ready to refuse, but instead she gave a small nod. The two of them walked in silence. Street lamps buzzed faintly overhead, casting long shadows that trailed behind them. Evelyn's cane tapped in steady rhythm, tap, 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 like a heartbeat that refused to quit. Finally, the stranger broke the silence. "Why did he know your name?" Her steps slowed. The cane stopped mid-air before striking the pavement again. She didn't answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was brittle but sharp. "Some men dig where they don't belong." "That wasn't digging," he replied. "That was certainty." He knew. Evelyn's lips pressed tight. Her eyes flicked to the stranger's face, studying him. Then she said something that shifted the air between them. "You talk like a man who's seen this before." The stranger didn't answer. Not immediately. His silence was an answer of its own. They turned down a narrower street, quieter now, lined with brick townhouses and iron gates. A porch light flickered in the distance. Evelyn's pace slowed further. Her breathing grew heavier. She leaned a little more on her cane. The stranger reached out, steadying her elbow. She let him for just a second, before pulling away. "I don't need saving," she whispered. "I know," he said, "but you need someone watching your back." Her eyes softened, just for a flicker, then hardened again. At last, they reached her house. A small, weathered home with peeling paint and a porch light that buzzed faintly against the night. She fumbled with her keys, her hands shaking slightly. Not from age, but from something deeper. Something unsettled. The stranger stood by, waiting, watching. And then, when the door finally opened, something slipped. A plain, unmarked envelope fell from the doorframe, landing silently at Evelyn's feet. She froze. Her cane trembled in her grip. The stranger bent quickly, picking it up before she could. He turned it over in his hand. No name, no return address, only her street scribbled faintly in ink. Evelyn's eyes darkened. She snatched it from his hand, clutching it close to her chest like it was a lifeline, or a curse. Her voice came low, almost a whisper. "They weren't supposed to know." The stranger frowned. "Know what?" Evelyn stepped inside, half in shadow, her figure framed by the dim porch light. She looked back at him one last time before closing the door. "Come back tomorrow," she said. if you really want answers." And then the door clicked shut. The stranger stood on the porch, the faint echo of her cane moving deeper into the house. He stared at the closed door, at the window where a curtain had just been drawn shut, and knew, whatever Evelyn Johnson was hiding, Mercer wasn't the only one chasing it. The envelope had changed everything. The night grew heavier after that. The porch light buzzed faintly, but the silence in the street was louder than any noise. The stranger lingered, staring at the door Evelyn had just shut. That envelope. It hadn't just dropped. It had been placed, positioned, left with intention. He looked both ways down the street, empty. No footsteps, no figures hiding in the shadows. But something gnawed at him. Whoever left that envelope had known the exact moment Evelyn would return. That wasn't luck. That was precision. Inside, Evelyn sat at her small kitchen table, the envelope pressed against her palm like it was burning her skin. The groceries sat forgotten on the counter. The bread Mercer had crushed lay slightly bent but untouched. Her cane leaned against the chair, and for the first time all day, Evelyn looked small, like a woman shrinking under a weight the world couldn't see. She didn't open it. She wouldn't. Not yet. Instead, she slid it into a drawer, the one she kept locked, the one already filled with other envelopes. Stacks of them, some unopened, some half-torn, all the same. Blank, unmarked, threatening by their very silence. She whispered to herself, though no one was there to hear, "They promised me this was buried." And then a soft creak from outside. A shadow moved across her thin curtains. She froze, her breath caught in her throat. The cane rattled faintly against the chair as she reached for it, her knuckles white. But when she pulled back the curtain, it was gone. No figure, no sound, just the flickering street lamp casting restless shadows. Back on the porch, the stranger finally stepped away from the door. His hands were tucked in his coat pockets, but his eyes stayed sharp, scanning, memorizing every detail of Evelyn's street. The quiet didn't reassure him. It only meant someone was waiting farther back, where eyes couldn't reach. As he walked away, he pulled out his phone. He didn't call anyone. He didn't text. Instead, he opened a single photo, one of a younger Evelyn, standing outside a courthouse decades earlier, a crowd behind her, a banner in her hands. He stared at the photo for a long moment. Then he whispered to himself, "So it's her, after all these years." The street was still awake, but not with sound. It was alive with watching. The stranger walked a few blocks before stopping at a diner, one of those 24-hour places with neon buzzing in the window and the smell of burnt coffee in the air. He slid into a booth at the corner, the one with a clear view of the front door. His eyes didn't linger on the menu, or the waitress, or the coffee pot steaming in her hand. They lingered on the reflection in the glass. Because behind him, two men in plain clothes had just taken seats at the counter. They hadn't ordered. They hadn't looked at each other. They were watching him. He stirred the empty cup in front of him and thought again of Evelyn's face when the envelope fell. That wasn't surprise. It was recognition, and recognition meant history. Meanwhile, back at her home, Evelyn sat in the dark. The only light came from the street lamp outside, bleeding through the thin curtains. Her hand rested on the drawer, trembling. She wanted to pull the envelope back out, to rip it open and face what waited inside. But she didn't. She couldn't. Instead, she reached for a framed photo on the shelf. A younger woman stared back at her, herself, 40 years ago. Next to her stood a man in uniform, tall, stern, protective. She traced his face with her finger, her breath uneven. "They said you were gone," she whispered, "but they never stopped sending these." Her voice cracked on the last word. She placed the photo down and covered it with her hand, as though hiding it from sight. Outside, a car rolled slowly down the street. Headlights washed over her house, then dimmed as it turned the corner. She gripped her cane tighter, her heart racing. She didn't need to look to know what it meant. They were reminding her, "We're still watching." Back at the diner, the stranger finally lifted his eyes. The 2 men at the counter hadn't touched their coffee. One tapped his finger on the rim of the mug in a steady rhythm. Tap, tap, tap. The same rhythm Evelyn's cane had made against the pavement. Coincidence or a message? The stranger's jaw tightened. He tossed a few bills on the table, stood up, and walked out into the night. He didn't look back. Not once. But he knew the 2 men would follow. And that was exactly what he wanted. Because if they followed him, it meant Evelyn had one night of safety. Or at least the illusion of it. Evelyn thought the night would pass quietly. She had turned the locks, drawn the curtains, and settled back into her chair, the photo of the man in uniform still hidden beneath her hand. But silence can be the loudest sound of all. At 1:17 a.m., a noise broke it, soft, deliberate, and wrong. Not the creak of the old house settling, not the scratch of branches against the siding. This sound came from the front porch, a slow, steady step, then another. Her heart pounded as the cane slipped from her grip and clattered against the hardwood floor. She froze, every nerve in her body screaming, but she didn't move. She didn't even breathe. The steps stopped. A shadow slid across the gap under the door. Someone was standing there, waiting. And then 3 knocks. Not loud, not forceful, just 3 measured, deliberate taps. The same rhythm as the men in the diner. Tap, tap, tap. She reached for the envelope in the drawer, her hand trembling. She didn't know why, but some part of her believed that whatever was in that envelope was connected to whoever now stood outside her home. Her lips parted, a whisper escaping. Not again. But before she could open it, the doorknob rattled. A voice, low and calm, slid through the cracks of the wood. "Mrs. Harris, we just want to talk." Her breath caught. They knew her name. She staggered back from the door, clutching the unopened envelope to her chest like a shield. She knew that voice. She couldn't place it, but she knew it. And then, as suddenly as it had started, the knocking stopped. Silence swallowed the room again. She waited, eyes wide, sweat dripping down her forehead. 10 seconds, 30, a full minute. Nothing. When she finally gathered the courage to peek through the curtains, the street was empty. The car was gone. The porch was bare. Only the envelope remained in her hand, heavier now than ever before. Meanwhile, across town, the stranger who had left the diner stopped in an abandoned parking lot. He wasn't alone anymore. Headlights flooded the space as 2 black sedans rolled in, boxing him in. The men from the counter stepped out, their faces expressionless. One of them spoke. "You shouldn't have come back. You know what happens to anyone who gets involved with her." The stranger said nothing. His silence was answer enough. And at that very moment, Evelyn tore the envelope open. Her gasp filled the room. What she saw inside wasn't money. It wasn't a letter. It was a photograph. A photograph of the man in uniform, the same one in her hidden picture frame. Only this one wasn't from 40 years ago. It was recent, taken just last week. Evelyn's hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the photo. Her eyes darted to the window again, scanning the street for movement. Empty. Quiet. Too quiet. She pressed the photograph against her chest, whispering, "It can't be you. It can't." Her instincts screamed one thing: leave, now. She snatched her coat from the rack by the door, shoved the envelope into her bag, and slipped out the back exit. The cold air bit at her face, but she didn't care. Every step she took echoed louder than it should have, her cane tapping a rhythm that betrayed her. Tap, tap, tap. She cursed the sound, tried to steady it, but the night carried everything. Somewhere in the darkness, she thought she heard footsteps answering hers. By the time she reached the corner, headlights flared. A car rolled past slowly, too slowly, its tinted windows hiding whoever sat inside. Evelyn pressed herself into the shadows of a brick wall, clutching the photograph as if it might somehow protect her. Miles away, the stranger stood his ground in the empty parking lot. Surrounded, outnumbered. The men moved closer, their words sharp as knives. "She thinks she's safe," one sneered. "She never learns." The stranger finally spoke, his voice calm but laced with iron. "If you lay one hand on her, you'll regret it." The man smirked. "And who's going to stop us? You?" A tense silence followed. Then, suddenly, sirens, distant but growing. The men exchanged quick glances before retreating to their cars, engines roaring as they sped off into the night. The stranger didn't move. He just looked up at the sky, as though time itself had been bought. But not much of it. Back in the city, Evelyn slipped into the back door of an old church. The wooden pews sat in silence, the smell of candle wax heavy in the air. She sank into the front row, gripping the photo in her lap, tears spilling freely now. Her lips trembled as she whispered a single name, a name no one had heard from her in decades. And as the echo of that name faded into the hollow church walls, a shadow moved in the back. She wasn't alone. The church was cold, too cold. Evelyn's breath came out in faint clouds as she clutched the photograph tighter. The silence inside wasn't comforting. It was heavy, suffocating. She could feel it. Eyes on her. Slowly she turned her head toward the back pews. A shadow shifted, tall and unmoving. "Who's there?" Her voice cracked, more fragile than defiant. No answer, only the faint sound of shoes on the wooden floorboards. A step, then another. Her hand gripped her cane, knuckles white. "If you've come for me," she whispered, "do it. I'm too tired to run." The figure paused, halfway down the aisle. And then, a voice, low, uncertain, almost human. "You kept it all these years, didn't you?" Evelyn's chest tightened. That voice. She hadn't heard it in decades, but it was carved into her memory. She shook her head, refusing to believe it. "This isn't real," she muttered. "It can't be you." The figure moved closer, light brushing against his face for the briefest moment, just enough for her to see the outline of a scar across his cheek. Her hand trembled violently, the photograph slipping from her fingers to the stone floor. Before she could speak again, the heavy wooden doors slammed shut. She flinched, spinning toward the entrance. Two silhouettes now stood inside the doorway. Not the stranger, not anyone she recognized. And from the shadows behind her, the figure with the scar melted away, leaving her alone between two sets of threats. At that same hour, miles away, the stranger gripped the steering wheel of a borrowed car. He wasn't driving aimlessly. He had a destination. An old address, one he hadn't visited in over 20 years. Evelyn's church. But as the spire came into view against the night sky, his headlights caught something on the roadside. A car, black sedan, engine still warm. He killed his lights, slowed down, and whispered under his breath. They found her first. The church doors groaned as they closed, the echo rolling through the vast, empty space. Evelyn's breath quickened. Two men stepped forward from the doorway, their boots heavy against the stone. "Mrs. Harris," one of them said, his tone flat. "You know why we're here." Her grip tightened on the cane. She didn't answer. "You've had something that doesn't belong to you," the other continued. His voice was smoother, too calm for the threat it carried. "And tonight, you're going to give it back." Evelyn bent slowly, her joints aching, and picked up the photograph from the floor. She held it to her chest, shaking her head. This was mine long before it was yours." The men exchanged a look, a silent message passing between them. The smoother-voiced one stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the aisle. "Do you even know what you're holding? Do you understand what that picture means?" Evelyn's lips trembled. She wanted to scream that she did, that she'd lived with the consequences of that face for decades. But fear locked the words inside her. Then the first man leaned forward, his voice a growl. "You've kept secrets long enough. People are dead because of you, and if you think age is going to protect you—" He let the threat hang, unfinished. Evelyn steadied herself on the cane, Her voice was quiet but sharp as glass. "If you're here to scare me, you'll have to do better." A flicker of respect, or maybe irritation, passed across their faces. The smoother-voiced man sighed, shaking his head. "Brave words, but bravery won't keep you alive." Before they could move closer, the heavy creak of the church's side door cut through the silence. All three turned toward it. Another figure entered, tall, silent, his footsteps steady. The men stiffened. Their hands went to their jackets. Evelyn's eyes widened. She knew that walk. Even in the shadows, she knew. Her heart skipped. She whispered under her breath, barely audible, "No, it can't be." And in that suspended second, the stranger's voice cut through the dark. "She's with me." The room froze. The silence in the church was suffocating. Dust hung in the air like frozen time. The two men shifted uneasily, their hands hovering near their jackets. The stranger took 3 measured steps forward, his voice low but unshaken. "I said, she's with me." Evelyn clutched the photograph tighter, her knuckles white. She couldn't take her eyes off the man's silhouette. Her lips moved soundlessly, as if testing the shape of a name she hadn't dared speak in decades. The smoother-voiced intruder broke the silence first. "You don't know what you're stepping into. She isn't who you think she is." The stranger's gaze hardened. "And you don't know what I've come back for." The air cracked with tension. Evelyn's chest heaved as she finally found her voice, brittle and trembling. "Stop, both of you." Her cane struck the floor once, the sound echoing through the pews. She lifted the photograph high enough for the flickering candlelight to touch it. "This man," she said, her voice quivering, "wasn't supposed to exist anymore." The intruders stiffened. The smoother one hissed, "Don't say his name." But Evelyn's eyes filled with tears as she whispered it anyway, just 2 syllables that seemed to weigh 1,000 pounds. The stranger's head snapped toward her, shock etched across his face. The 2 intruders exchanged panicked looks. One of them muttered under his breath, "If that gets out, everything unravels." Evelyn lowered the photo slowly, her hand trembling so badly she almost dropped it. "I tried to bury it. I tried to let the world forget. But you wouldn't let me." The smoother intruder stepped closer, his tone sharp, urgent. "Then bury it tonight, Mrs. Harris, or we'll do it for you." Before Evelyn could respond, the stranger moved, not fast, not violent, just 1 step closer, his presence cutting the space in half. "Touch her," he said, voice like iron, "and you'll answer to me." The church seemed to tilt, the fragile balance on the verge of shattering. Evelyn's cane slipped, clattering against the floor. She didn't bend to pick it up. She just stared at the stranger, heart pounding, as one thought ran wild in her mind. "If he's really who I think he is, then nothing will ever be the same again." The stillness inside the church broke in an instant. The smoother-voiced intruder flicked his wrist, and steel glinted under the candlelight. A gun. His partner mirrored him, pulling another from his coat. "Last warning," the smoother man hissed. "Give us the photo." Evelyn's knees weakened. Her breath came ragged. The photograph felt like it was burning her hand. Then, without warning, the stranger moved. His hand lashed out, sending one weapon skidding across the floor. The sound of metal scraping against stone thundered louder than the church bells themselves. The second man fired. The shot echoed, wood splintering from the pew beside Evelyn. She gasped, ducking, clutching the photograph against her chest. The stranger didn't flinch. He closed the distance, slamming one man against the altar rail. The candles shook, wax spilling like blood across the floor. But in the chaos, the smoother-voiced intruder seized Evelyn by the arm, yanking her upright. His grip was iron. The cold muzzle of his weapon pressed against her temple. "Don't take another step," he snarled, "or the old woman dies." The church froze again. The stranger halted, his chest rising and falling with fury. His eyes met Evelyn's. For the first time that night she saw something in his expression. Fear, Not for himself. For her. Her voice shook, but her words carried steel. If you kill me, the truth comes out anyway. You can't bury him forever. The man's grip tightened. He hissed into her ear, Then I'll bury you and whoever tries. Before another word could be spoken, headlights flared through the stained glass windows. Red and blue light painted the walls in jagged streaks. Sirens. Close. Too close. The intruders froze. The smoother one cursed under his breath. He shoved Evelyn back, retreating toward the side exit. His partner staggered free from the stranger's grip, blood trickling from his nose. "Next time," he spat, "she won't be so lucky." And just like that, they were gone. The church doors slammed, leaving Evelyn trembling, clutching the photograph. The stranger approached slowly, lowering his head to meet her eyes. His voice was low, rough. "You should have burned that picture the day you got it." Evelyn's lips quivered. "And if I had, would you still be standing here?" The sirens grew louder. Tires screeched outside. Flashlights cut through the windows. For the first time, Evelyn realized the real danger wasn't who had just left, it was who was about to walk in. The heavy wooden doors of St. Mark's groaned, then burst open with a force that rattled the pews. Floods of red and blue lights spilled into the sanctuary, painting the sacred walls with chaos. Figures stormed in, uniforms, boots, badges flashing in the glare. At first glance they looked like police, but Evelyn noticed something that froze her heart. No insignia, no name tags, just black tactical vests and cold, unblinking eyes. One of them barked orders. "Hands where we can see them. Step away from the woman." The stranger raised his hands slowly, his jaw tightening, but his eyes flickered toward Evelyn. The unspoken message was clear. This isn't what it looks like. Two men in dark gear closed in, one of them grabbing Evelyn by the shoulders, spinning her roughly to face the aisle. His grip was harsher than any officer's she'd ever known. "What's in your hand?" he demanded, prying at her fist. The photograph. Evelyn clutched it tighter, her voice trembling but defiant. "It's mine." The man's lips curled into something between a smirk and a threat. Not anymore. He wrenched, but the stranger moved faster. With a sudden burst, he lunged forward, knocking the man's arm aside. The photo slipped, fluttering to the floor. For an instant, the candlelight revealed the faded edges, the haunting silhouette within. One of the black-vested men bent to snatch it up, only to pause. His gloved hand hovered. His eyes narrowed at the image, then shot upward toward Evelyn with a look she couldn't read. Recognition, or fear, maybe both. "Secure them," the leader snapped. In seconds, rough hands grabbed Evelyn's arms, pulling them behind her back. She cried out, but no one flinched. Even the stranger, now pinned against a pillar, fought only enough to make it clear he wasn't giving in easily. "Wait," Evelyn gasped. "You don't understand. Those men, they threatened me." But her words vanished under the cold voice of the leader. "You shouldn't have come here tonight. You've seen too much." Her blood turned to ice. This wasn't rescue. It was capture. The sound of her heartbeat drowned out the sirens outside. The real police hadn't come. These men were something else. And as the leader tucked the photograph into his vest pocket, Evelyn realized, whoever these men worked for, the picture mattered more than her life. The cold grip of zip ties bit into Evelyn's wrists. Her cries echoed through the cavernous church, but no one outside would hear. The men moved with precision, too precise for ordinary law enforcement. Their boots struck the marble in sync, dragging Evelyn and the stranger toward the rear exit of St. Mark's. Her eyes darted to the altar, the pews, the flickering candles. Places of refuge only hours ago now blurred into a nightmare prison. The leader spoke without looking back. "You should have burned that photo. Now you've pulled the wrong people into the wrong game." Evelyn's heart pounded. The photograph, stolen into his vest, was the reason she was still breathing. She knew it. Whatever truth it held, it was bigger than her, bigger than the stranger, bigger than this church. But then, something unexpected. The stranger, still held by two men, turned his head slightly. His lips moved, barely audible. "Don't fight. Wait for the break." Her breath caught. A break? Here? With these men? She wanted to scream at him, but instead she nodded, her trembling body betraying the fire in her chest. They pushed through the side exit into the night. The sirens were gone. No flashing red and blue, no marked cars. Instead, two black SUVs idled in the alley, engines humming like beasts in the dark. One of the men yanked the door open, shoving Evelyn inside. The stale leather smell wrapped around her, suffocating. The stranger was forced into the seat across from her, his face shadowed, but his eyes locked on hers. The leader slid in last, slamming the door shut. With a nod, the SUVs rolled forward, vanishing into the sleeping city. Minutes ticked by in silence, broken only by the low hum of the tires. Then the leader leaned forward, his voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You want answers, don't you? You think you've stumbled onto some injustice, some story to tell your grandchildren." Evelyn's lips parted, but no words came. He smirked. "You've stumbled into something older than you can imagine. Something men have killed for, and will kill again." The stranger shifted, his hands flexing against the restraints. His voice was gravel. "Careful what you reveal. She doesn't need to know." The leader's gaze narrowed, then flicked back to Evelyn. "He's right. Not yet." Her pulse thundered in her ears. Not yet, which meant the truth was real, which meant this was only the beginning. As the SUV roared into the night, Evelyn realized the bitter truth. Her freedom wasn't taken away tonight. It was traded for a secret she hadn't even uncovered yet. If you were in Evelyn's place, would you try to escape immediately, or wait and gamble on the stranger's plan? Comment below. And don't forget to subscribe, because what's waiting at the end of this drive will break everything wide open. When the SUV stopped, Evelyn expected noise, light, commotion. Instead, silence. A heavy door opened, the night air replaced with the sterile chill of recycled ventilation. They dragged her down a corridor with no windows, only long stretches of gray concrete and buzzing fluorescent lights. Each echo of their boots felt like a countdown. They pushed her into a room with nothing but a table, two chairs, and a single camera perched in the corner. No clock, no mirror, just the hum of electricity and the weight of unseen eyes. Her restraints were cut. The men left without a word. The lock clicked, and then silence again. Evelyn sat at the table, her palms raw from the ties. She whispered into the void, "Where am I?" The door opened. The stranger entered, not the leader, not the ones in black, but him, the man who had spoken in the church. His wrists were free now, his posture calm. He looked different. Not a prisoner, not an ally, something in between. He slid into the chair across from her, folding his hands on the table. "You're scared. That's good. Fear keeps you alive." Evelyn's throat tightened. "Who are you?" He didn't answer. Instead, he studied her face like a puzzle. "They didn't bring you here by accident. You saw something, didn't you? Something you shouldn't have." Her mind flashed to the photo, the blurred figures, the circle marked in red. She swallowed. I don't even know what it means." His lips twitched into something between a smile and a warning. "That's the dangerous part. You will, and when you do, you'll wish you hadn't." The door opened again. This time it was the leader. He dropped a folder onto the table with a heavy slap. The edges were frayed, the paper yellowed, like it had passed through too many hands. He spoke without preamble. Evelyn Moore, retired nurse, south side of Chicago, widow, mother of one, grandmother of two. Her heart sank. They knew everything. The leader leaned closer. His voice was a whisper that cut sharper than any shout. You think this is about a racist cop humiliating you on a street corner? That was the spark. But sparks ignite bigger fires, and now, whether you like it or not, you're in the middle of it. He pushed the folder toward her. Inside, another photo, not blurred this time, clear, crisp, and one of the faces was hers, taken only hours ago, at the church. Her breath caught. Her fingers trembled as she slid the photo back. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. The leader's eyes didn't blink. "Not want, need. We need you to deliver a message, and if you refuse, others will pay the price." The stranger's jaw tightened. He looked away. For the first time, Evelyn sensed he wasn't in control either, and in that instant she knew something terrifying. This wasn't about her past. This was about her future. The folder remained on the table. The single photograph stared back at Evelyn like an accusation. Her own face, captured without her knowing, sat frozen in time, branded with a red circle. She could feel her chest tighten, her lungs straining for air that never seemed to come. The leader tapped the photo with 2 fingers. "This is proof. They're already watching you, which means you can't run. You can't hide, and you sure as hell can't pretend this never happened." Evelyn's voice cracked. "What message? What are you talking about?" He leaned back, his eyes sharp, his tone almost casual. "You'll tell the city something for us. You'll repeat it, word for word, to the right people, in the right place. And when you do, doors will open, chaos will spread, and you'll walk away alive." Her stomach dropped. A messenger. They wanted her to carry something toxic, something she didn't understand. She shook her head. No, I won't be part of this." The leader's face hardened. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Say that again." Evelyn met his gaze, her body trembling but her words steady. "I won't do it." The silence that followed was more terrifying than any scream. The leader gave a small nod. 2 men entered. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They dragged Evelyn out of the chair and forced her down a hallway. The stranger remained behind, his expression unreadable. They shoved her into another room, dark this time, colder, walls bare concrete with a single chair bolted to the floor. They tied her down, straps cutting into her skin. A humming sound filled the room. A screen flickered on in front of her. And then she saw it, her daughter, on a live feed, at home, safe. For now. The camera zoomed in slowly, deliberately, until her granddaughter's laughter echoed faintly through the speaker. Evelyn's heart broke in 2. The leader's voice poured through the speaker, calm, deliberate. "You see, Evelyn, it isn't just you we hold. Every refusal carries a cost, one you can't afford to pay." Tears burned her eyes, but she clenched her fists. Her voice came out hoarse, a whisper. "You monsters." The screen went black, the straps released. The guards dragged her back to the first room, dropping her into the chair across from the stranger once more. The leader leaned forward, placing the folder in front of her again. "Now, shall we talk about the message?" Evelyn's lips trembled. Her silence was an answer. The stranger looked at her, then down at his hands, and just before the leader could speak again, he muttered words only she could hear. "Wait, the cracks are coming. Watch for them." The folder sat between them like a loaded weapon. The leader hadn't opened it again. He didn't need to. The weight of it was enough. Evelyn stared at the man across from her, the stranger who wasn't really a prisoner but wasn't free either. His eyes avoided hers now, but his earlier words echoed, "The cracks are coming. Watch for them." And then she saw it. A flicker, just a flicker. The camera in the corner, the one that had been silently recording, went dark for half a second. Barely noticeable, but real. When it blinked back to life, the stranger finally met her gaze. His look said everything, now or never. The leader stood, gathering the folder. "We'll give you time to think, Evelyn, but time is running out, and so is patience." He left. The lock clicked. Silence. Then the stranger leaned forward, his voice barely a breath. "They're not as untouchable as they want you to believe." Evelyn's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" He shook his head. "Not now. Just listen. In 30 seconds the lights will cut. You'll hear chaos. Don't freeze." Her body tensed. "Chaos? What are you talking about?" But before he could answer, the overhead lights sputtered. Once, twice. Then darkness swallowed the room. Shouts erupted in the hallway. Heavy boots thundered. A door slammed somewhere distant. And then, a gunshot. Evelyn's breath hitched. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white. The stranger moved fast. Too fast. He slipped something from under his sleeve, a tiny, sharpened edge of metal, and slashed through the restraints at her wrists. The cord snapped loose. She stared at him, wide-eyed. "You planned this?" He didn't deny it. "Move, now." The door burst open, not with guards but with smoke, thick, choking smoke that rolled into the room, swallowing the air. The stranger pulled her to her feet, his grip firm but urgent. "They're distracted. This is your crack." Evelyn stumbled after him, coughing, eyes burning. The corridor beyond was chaos, figures running, alarms blaring, red emergency lights strobing against the concrete walls. For the first time since she was dragged into this nightmare, the cage had a door. But whether it led to freedom, or something even worse, was a question she had no time to ask. The smoke pressed in thick and bitter, clawing down Evelyn's throat, blinding her eyes. The stranger's grip yanked her forward, step after frantic step through the red strobing hallway. "Stay with me!" he shouted. His voice was muffled, broken by the alarm's piercing wail, but then, just like that, his hand slipped from hers. "Wait!" Evelyn gasped, her arms outstretched, searching. Fingers grasped nothing but air. The smoke swallowed him whole. Her heart thundered. She tried to follow his voice, but the chaos made every sound bleed together. Boots, shouts, the grinding shriek of metal doors slamming shut. She pressed herself to the wall, coughing, struggling to breathe. And that's when she saw it. A door, slightly ajar, light leaking out, faint but steady. Not the red of the alarms, not the harsh white of fluorescence. A softer glow, almost ordinary. Her instincts screamed to keep moving, to find the stranger again, but her feet carried her toward the light. The door creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, a small room, no guards, no smoke, just shelves lined with file boxes, cabinets, and stacks of manila folders, and in the center of the table, another photo. She froze. It was her again. Evelyn Moore, the same red circle. But this time, there were others. Dozens of faces, men, women, children, different ages, different backgrounds, all circled, all marked. Her trembling hands flipped through the stack, each photo labeled with a date, a location, and one chilling word scribbled in ink. Candidate. Her mind raced. Candidate for what? Her body shook as she dropped the photo back on the table. This wasn't random. This wasn't about her speaking up in public. She was part of something planned, something orchestrated long before today. The alarms grew louder outside. Heavy boots pounded closer. Evelyn's breath quickened. She could run, she could hide, but the truth, whatever this was staring her in the face. Her choice was clear. She stuffed as many files as she could into her coat, heart hammering, knowing that every second risked discovery. And then a shadow fell across the doorway. "Move, and you won't make it to the hall." The leader. His silhouette cut through the smoke, his voice cold, steady, final. Evelyn froze, her fists clenched around the stolen files, her pulse roaring in her ears. For the first time, she wasn't sure if escape would save her, or doom her faster. The smoke curled in the doorway, the leader's shadow stretching long across the floor. Evelyn clutched the stolen files tight to her chest, her pulse roaring in her ears. He stepped inside, slow, deliberate, his eyes locked on hers. "You think you found answers in those folders? All you found are more doors, And everyone leads somewhere you're not ready to walk. Evelyn's voice shook, but she didn't back down. Why me? Why my family? What is this really about? For the first time, the leader's mask of control cracked, just slightly. You weren't chosen, you were measured. Every move, every word, every moment you thought was yours alone was part of something bigger. Evelyn's grip tightened. She glanced at the photo stack, faces marked, lives tracked. Measured for what? The leader leaned closer, his whisper like ice. For the role you've already stepped into, messenger. And then, gunfire erupted down the corridor. The stranger's voice shouted through the smoke. Now, Evelyn, run! The leader spun toward the door. In that instant, Evelyn's decision burned in her chest like fire. She could drop the files, escape into the chaos, and maybe live. Or she could hold on, carry the truth into the world, and risk losing everything, including her family. Her feet moved before her mind decided. She bolted past the leader, shoving through the smoke, the stolen files pressed against her ribs. Hands reached for her in the blur, guards, shadows, even the stranger. She didn't know who she collided with, only that she kept moving, lungs searing, heart shattering. Then, air. Cold, fresh air. The night sky overhead. Sirens wailing in the distance. She stumbled into the street, clutching the evidence that could tear open everything. For a moment she thought she was free. But then headlights flared. Another black SUV pulled up, blocking her path. Its door opened slowly, and from the shadows, a calm, familiar voice called her name. Evelyn. Evelyn escaped with the truth in her hands. But did she walk straight into another trap? Was the stranger really her ally, or just another player in the game? What would you have done? Run for safety, or hold on to the evidence no matter the cost? Tell me in the comments. And subscribe now, because this story isn't over. Not by a long shot.